Hello, a quick vlog, because a couple of news items have caught my attention here in Britain and America. I thought I'll just give my two pennies worth. So we're having an election over here in Britain, and the Tories, the Conservative Party, sort of roughly the equivalent of the Republican Party in America, have announced that they want to introduce conscription for the military so that 18-year-olds will be forced to spend a year in the army or whatever, or doing some sort of public service. But the army is what they're talking about, the military anyway. And at first glance, you think, well, you know, it could do them some good, some education, some training, some discipline, and all this. This is what they're looking at. Okay, but what's the bad side of that? I think that, I mean, we know we don't have honest politicians, okay, in the world today, or probably ever, right? Honest people are not in power around the world, okay? So what's the real reason? What can they do with these children, or barely adult people? Now, in this country, the government has been cutting and cutting and cutting the military, and it's now almost non-functional, actually. So these forced recruits will represent cheap boots on the ground for whichever forever war they want to fight next, right? I think that's really what they're for. It's just free recruits for the government. And they will not look after them. They will throw them in to wherever to do the government's killing for them. We know that in the future we're going to have more drones and robots and stuff like that, so you won't need such skilled soldiers, perhaps, anyway, and a skilled military is expensive. But recruits are probably going to be, in the long run, cheap. And easily replaceable when they're killed. We're talking about governments that have sent people into Afghanistan, Iraq, various places in the Middle East. They're lining people up in Eastern Europe as we speak, getting ready for something there. Governments are lining people up against China. There's actually wars in many places around the world. And our countries in particular, Britain and America, are notorious for interfering in matters which probably don't concern them. Because we want to make the world a better place. Right. Well, that's how it's sold to us. But of course they want to make the world a better place for them. Not for you and me, and certainly not for our children, who will be conned into being killed on their behalf. So I don't think under any circumstances we should allow that to happen. However, to be fair, in this country, the Tories, the Conservatives, are not going to win the next election. It's almost impossible. It's not impossible, but it's almost impossible. Electorally, they are so far behind that it would take some extraordinary events to change that. We're going to have the Labour Party probably as the next government, and they appear to be just the same as the Conservatives. They haven't mentioned that policy, but I wouldn't trust them an inch. As for honest politicians, the other story that got my attention, and you can relate the two, is Donald Trump, right? Guilty of tax fraud, basically. Hiding payments he made to a prostitute to keep her mouth shut. Nobody really doubts, I assume nobody really doubts that he was using the services of this lady at one time, and he paid her to not cause problems for him at the last election, the one before that. And for some reason they're prosecuting him over there. Now I say for some reason, because there's lots of presidents and presidential candidates who could be prosecuted for stuff and they haven't been. And then you get this relatively unimportant tax fraud issue, and he's prosecuted. Now, they should be prosecuting people for things like this, of course, but there are lots of other things that people haven't been prosecuted for over in America and over here. Come to that. What about the Afghanistan and the Iraq wars fought under false pretenses? The dodgy dossier of Tony Blair over here. Those wars were started based on lies. Weapons of mass destruction in the case of the Iraq war. And in the face of massive protests, we had I think it was 1 million people protesting in the streets here. Ignored, completely ignored. It's one reason I don't bother with protests and that sort of thing. I seldom go. I might go just to see, but not to take part. Because they're counterproductive. I think protests are actually counterproductive, usually. Because what happens is people feel that they've achieved something. They go out, they make their voice heard, they feel they've achieved something, and the powers that be are free to ignore them thereafter. Nothing is done. The protest is actually counterproductive because people who might have been more resistant feel they've achieved something, and they let the steam go and they go home and stay quiet. It's all over. Protesting is actually a way of preventing change because of human psychology. It's like you go to the shops and you buy something and you feel better when you're not dealing with your depression or whatever it is, right? You instead subvert the feelings and you get by for another day, but nothing changes, in fact. It's that kind of thing. You protest and nothing changes, in fact. But there's lots of things like that haven't been, nobody's been prosecuted for all the illegal coups that the CIA and people like that have managed to set off in various countries. Nobody's been prosecuted for being in Epstein's black book. We haven't officially been told who's in his black book, even. I mean, by now, the authorities must know who's on most of those tapes that Epstein's house was loaded with, who's in his book. No prosecutions. Wonder why. Can you think why? Let me know in the comments why not. No prosecutions for drone strikes killing civilians at weddings and so on in the Middle East during these forever wars. Oh, there was a terrorist at the wedding. Okay. What about the 60 other people you killed? Guilty by association. Honest. Yeah. What about shooting journalists from helicopters? Nobody's been prosecuted for that or for authorising it. But Julian Assange has been pursued relentlessly for letting on that it happened. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? Well, we know who was responsible for it. It may have been done by a proxy poodle. I suspect the Brits blew it up on behalf of the Americans. That's my personal best guess. Obviously, the Americans are responsible for it because they're the ones who benefited. I think the claim was that the Russians blew it up, but it was the Russians' own pipeline. They paid for it. Right. They were wanting to use it to sell gas to the West. So, instead, it got blown up and Europe had to buy its gas from the United States. Liquid petroleum gas. How's that for competition? Actually, nobody's been prosecuted for the Watergate scandal, have they? Nixon was given a pardon and he wasn't prosecuted. And this is going way back, right? This sort of thing has been going on and going on and going on. We know Trump also kept a load of classified documents, right? I think they tried to prosecute him for that, but didn't get anywhere. I think some minions have been prosecuted. But interestingly, Biden has done the same thing. He disclosed classified information to his biographer. Quotes from classified documents. Somehow there hasn't been any attempt to prosecute him. I mean, we're in a world where people like our health minister here can send people into old people's homes without checking their health during the pandemic, right? And that's apparently okay. Or give deals to his friends. And no prosecutions. So these honest people are going to be in charge of conscripting people for the army, are they? And they're going to go to war only for good reasons. What do you think? Am I mistaken? Bye for now.